ready to get started?
The state is ready, Your Honor.
Okay,
As is the defense.
okay. Does the prosecution have any pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. Before we begin, though, may we make appearances before the court?
You may.
Good afternoon. My name is Jordan Weeks, and I'm joined along with my co-counsel, Mr. Cameron Wagner. Good afternoon, Your Honor. And Miss Megan Putnam.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And today joining us will be Detective Chesney.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Now, we have a binder full of a bunch of pretrial matters, including rules of evidence, relevant Midlands case law, orders on motions in limine, a notice of intent to offer character evidence. Opposing counsel has seen these. May we approach intended?
You may. Thank you, counsel. Any further pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. Since we've never been in your court before, what are your preferences for moving about the well, approaching opposing counsel, approaching the bench and witnesses?
You may move freely about the well. Please ask to approach the witness or the bench. No need to ask for opposing counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. And we'd like to make note of Rules 603 and 615, which are respectively the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives. As said before, Detective Chesney will be joining us throughout the trial, and 615 being the constructive swearing in of all witnesses.
Okay, thank you, counsel.
And with that, Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed.
Okay, thanks. Does the defense have any pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. May we make our appearances before the court?
You may.
Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Morgan, alongside my co-counsel, Ms. Julia Calvin Johnson,
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
and Mr. Benedict Nsenga.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
We represent the defendant in today's case, Ms. Jordan Ryder. The defense has one pretrial document to bring to your attention. It's an entry of motion of dismissal concerning Ms. Ryder's previous charge. May I approach and tender?
You may. Thank you, counsel.
And at this time, Your Honor, we'd ask that you take judicial notice of specifically the language of that document. Specifically that Ms. Ryder did in fact have custody of her daughter on the day in question and therefore could not be guilty of either kidnapping or felony murder.
Thank you, counsel.
And with that, we're ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Okay, and just to confirm prosecution, is the state pursuing murder or manslaughter?
The state is pursuing aggravated murder.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I guess we are ready to go forward with opening statements.
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the prosecution have an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, and members of the jury, may it please the court. I was just so angry. I'm sorry this happened. I didn't mean to do it. Members of the jury, take the words of Jordan Ryder. Now, on July 14th, their daughter, Parker Page, was found at the bottom of the cliff off the Letron Loop. But the events leading up to that is what is important in today's case. You see, Parker didn't live the life of the average 12-year-old. She was diagnosed with a condition called osteogenesis imperfecta. Now, this condition means that an energetic, fun-loving 12-year-old can no longer play sports, can no longer play outside with their friends, and that a short fall or even a bump could mean broken bones and misery for her. Now, Jordan Ryder spent 5 years away from Parker. And in these 5 years, Parker had to grow up with this disease alone. And when they finally were reconnected, Jordan decided to take a trip to the Calkins campground. This was supposed to be a trip for a mother and a daughter to reconnect and to bond. And that was the plan. However, you'll hear today about several arguments that the two had. This bickering back and forth, and this led to anger in Jordan Ryder, and it elevated, it escalated, it got worse and worse, and you'll hear after several arguments it turned to shouting and yelling, and then silence. And it's that silence that's important, members of the jury, because it's that silence that Jordan Ryder, in a fit of rage, took the hiking staff from Parker and pushed her off the cliff at the Letron Loop, where her body was found the next day 40 feet below in the rocks. Now, because of the actions of Jordan Ryder, we in the state are bringing a charge of aggravated murder. Now, in order to convict the defendant, we have to prove that she knowingly caused the death of 12-year-old Parker. Now, there's two elements to hone in here, knowingly and causation. Now, in order to convict, we have to prove to you that Jordan Ryder was aware of their actions and knew that their actions had consequences, and that causation, but for their actions of pushing Parker off the mountain, she would still be here today. Now, we, as the prosecution, have the sole burden of proof, and that burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, a reasonable doubt means that at the end of today's trial, all questions will be answered. And we are confident that we'll be able to do that today because we're going to bring forth evidence and testimony. You're going to hear from three witnesses. Our first is going to be Detective Chesney, the lead investigator in today's case. Detective Chesney, you're going to hear from them about several pieces of evidence that they found on the defendant, Jordan Ryder. One of these pieces was a napkin. And on this napkin was several words, items, and other things that were found, including one that's most important here is the hiking staff. And that hiking staff was then given to Dr. Quincy. And you're going to hear from Dr. Quincy that that hiking staff was a cause for a bruise on the left clavicle. And you're finally going to hear from Kelly Dews. Kelly Dews was a hiker on the trail that day. And Kelly Dews heard argument after argument, and it escalated to shouting and yelling and silence. And when they went back down to where they last saw Jordan and Parker, all that was left was footprints. Now, at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel is going to come before you, and he's going to ask you to find Jordan Ryder guilty of aggravated murder. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Does the defense have an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
They can't prove what never happened. On July 15th of 2018, Parker Page, a 12-year-old girl, was found dead. Her mother, Jordan Ryder, had taken her to Hawkins Campground for some mother-daughter bonding time. But the outcome was something that no one could have ever imagined. Parker went missing the night of July 14th, and then the next day, tragedy struck. Parker was found dead. Now, in the aftermath of a tragedy, people want to know what happened. They want answers. They want someone to blame. So when the prosecution was faced with this difficult situation, they decided that Miss Ryder must be to blame for her daughter's death. They turned a grieving, devastated parent into, they blamed a grieving and devastated parent, and they said that she must be responsible for her own daughter's death and disappearance. But throughout today's trial, you'll see that that never happened. Now, it's because the prosecution made this accusation of aggravated murder that we're here in today's case. When they made this accusation, they assumed a burden of proof. And that burden of proof solely and heavily lies on the table of the prosecution in today's case. This means that the prosecution is tasked with proving every single element of aggravated murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, this is the highest burden in our entire judicial system. Beyond a reasonable doubt means that you as the jury cannot draw any other explanation from the facts except that Miss Ryder committed the crime. Now, the specific elements that the prosecution has to prove in today's case are that Miss Ryder knowingly and consciously made the decision to push Parker Page off the LaCrone Loop, therefore causing her death. Now, the prosecution has to prove that Miss Ryder was practically certain that pushing her off the LaCrone Loop would kill her. Now, they won't be able to meet this burden because you'll hear from the defense's witnesses. you'll hear from Dr. Lopez, an expert in medical pathology, who will take this stand and tell you that there is no evidence pointing to Parker Page being pushed off the chrome loop. Dr. Lopez will then go on to tell you that Parker Page's death was likely an accident. She'll tell you that it was simply an accident. Then you'll hear from Armani Rodriguez. And Miss Rodriguez is the owner of Calkins Campground. And she'll take this stand and she'll tell you that her campground was in good and safe condition. And she specifically told that to Jordan Ryder. Miss Rodriguez will then go on to tell you that at 4:30 p.m., she saw Parker Page and Jordan Ryder together. And then after that, you'll hear from Cameron Lee. Cameron Lee is a hiker who was on the trail that day and will take this stand and tell you that at 4:40 p.m. she saw Jordan Ryder return with Parker back to the campground. And finally, you'll hear from the prosecution's witnesses. And I want you to keep in mind, members of the jury, if they'll bring you any witness in today's case who will tell you that they saw Jordan Ryder push Parker Page off the chrome loop. Now, at the conclusion of today's trial, my co-counsel, Julia Kemple Johnson, will come before you, and she'll show you exactly how the prosecution simply cannot prove what never happened. Find Jordan Ryder not guilty of aggravated murder. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. At this time, is the prosecution ready to proceed with its case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Detective Chesney to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Yes, my name is Detective Jane Chesney.
And what do you do for a living?
I am a detective with the Midland Center Police Department.
How long have you been a detective?
I originally joined the force in 2008, and then I was promoted to detective in 2016.
And upon being promoted to detective, is there any special training?
Yes, in addition to my 720 hours of basic training, I also received 40 hours in intensive investigative training and victim retrieval training.
And how are you connected to today's case?
I am the lead detective in the disappearance and murder of Parker Page.
And how do you do this role as a detective?
As lead detective, it's my responsibility to make sure that our investigation follows departmental procedures, and that procedure also includes a three-step investigation. First, we follow up on any leads that there could be that were provided by the initial complainant, and then second, provided those leads go somewhere, we conduct a search for any kind of physical evidence, and we also question all eyewitnesses. Third, if the lead causes an arrest, we then interrogate any kind of suspect, and we also examine any kind of potential crime scene.
And did you speak to the complainant of this case?
Yes, I spoke to Corbin Dallas.
And what did you speak about?
I initially got a call that there was a missing child, which was Parker Page, and I responded to the call.
And what the interaction between you and Corbin Dallas look like?
He informed me of Parker Page's asthma and as well as their brittle bone disease, and they told me that there was a Find My Phone app on Parker's cell phone, which we then pinged to Calkins Campground.
Did you find Parker at the Calkins Campground?
Not initially, but we did talk to Armani Rodriguez, the campsite owner, or the campground owner, excuse me, which led us to campsite 12, which is where we found the defendant, Jordan Ryder.
Did you speak to the defendant?
Yes, upon speaking to the defendant, I arrested them because I believe they were in violation of their parole, and
Did you seize any physical evidence at the time?
yes, I seized a napkin that was on Jordan Ryder's person, as well as numerous items that were in the tent, which included a shovel, a knife, and a hiking staff.
No. Would you recognize a map of the Calkins Campground if I were to show it to you?
Yes, I would.
Let the record reflect on approaching opposing counsel with Exhibit 23. Let the record reflect on approaching the witness with the same. Would Your Honor like a courtesy copy?
No.
All right. Now, what is this that I've handed you?
This is the map of Hawkins Campground.
Does this appear to be a fair and accurate copy?
Yep.
Does it seem to be altered or changed in any way?
Not to my knowledge, no.
It's at this time, the prosecution moves for Exhibit 23 to evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Okay, at this time it's so admitted.
Now, on the map, where did you find Parker's body?
We found Parker Page's body up at the T, kind of like the top of a capital T, right where the Hawkins overlook would be.
True, please. Commissioner Tentative Bench.
Sure.
Now, did you interrogate Jordan Ryder?
Yes, we did.
How'd the interrogation go?
There were a couple things that stood out to me during the interrogation.
Like what?
Well, initially I asked Jordan Ryder about any kind of health insurance that Parker Page might have had, considering she had a number of health issues. But all that Jordan Ryder seemed to be focused on was the life insurance that Parker Page had, which I had never even asked any questions about life insurance.
Anything else happened during the interrogation?
Yes, we also found it a little troubling that Parker was a frail girl who had a serious bone condition, and Jordan was a full-grown woman.
Objection, more prejudicial than probative, may I be heard?
You may.
Now, to have this witness's comment that certain evidence she collected was concerning, well, that has very low probative value because it's this detective's job to collect evidence, but not to analyze it. So for her to say that specific things were concerning, they were troubling, that's more prejudicial than probative in regard, or in opposition to her just presenting evidence that she's aware of.
Any response, counsel?
I would be amenable to re-asking the question, Your Honor.
Certainly, if you concur, the objection is sustained.
Motion to strike, Your Honor.
Granted.
Now, what did you observe in this interrogation?
I observed that Parker Page was a girl with a serious bone condition, and that Jordan Ryder was a full-grown woman. And by that observation, we deemed that it would be possible that Jordan would have the means to commit the crime.
And was there any final things that stuck out to you?
Yes. We also observed that there was a lot of alone time that Parker and Jordan had together, and so that provided them with ample time. It provided Jordan, with ample time to commit the crime as well.
Objection, speculation, may I be heard?
You may.
Now, again, this witness is interpreting evidence that she's not aware of. She's taking things that she heard in her interrogation and that she's coming to conclusions about what the defendant possibly could have done. That's outside of her rationally based perceptions of just hearing that evidence from the interrogation.
May I respond, Your
You
Honor?
may.
This is Detective Chesney. I believe this is not speculation and is well within her rationally based perception. If through her investigation she notices a certain amount of exclusion, then she should be willing to attest to the fact that because there is that level of seclusion, there is an ample amount of opportunity to possibly commit the crime.
Could you make an offer proof for me of how she's going to finish out the sentence that she's currently?
Yes, I am then going to ask her about the campground to where they were staying. Campground 12 is the most secluded campground on there, as well as the low amount of population of people on the trail, giving them that time or that opportunity.
Can you return to or have her repeat what she had just said in terms of did he have the ability? What was the line of what she was actually saying? Just
As
right
First
before,
opportunity was?
right before his objection. I had said that given the fact that Jordan and Parker had long periods of seclusion time together, it would be possible that Jordan could have committed the crime. I'm going to sustain the objection.
Motion to strike, Your Honor.
Granted.
Now, you retrieved a napkin off of Jordan Ryder, correct?
Yes, I did.
Do you know who wrote on this napkin?
Yes, upon retrieving the napkin, I asked Jordan Ryder whose handwriting it was, and they said that it was theirs.
And would you recognize this napkin if I would show it to you today?
Of course.
Let the record reflect and approach your opposing counsel, Exhibit 26.
Excuse me.
Record reflect and approach your witness with the same.
Okay.
Now, Secretary Chesney, what is this that I've handed you?
This is the napkin that I found on Jordan Ryder. Honor.
And does this appear to be a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, it does.
Does it appear to be changed or altered in any way?
No, it's not.
So at this moment, the prosecution move exhibit 26 in evidence.
Objection under Rule 403, more prejudicial than probative, may I be heard?
Yeah.
Now, the defense has a good faith belief that at no point during this trial will the prosecution be able to lay the foundation of where this napkin was written, at what time it was written, or in any way connect it to the events of July 14. And because of that, its probative value is necessarily very low. But the prejudicial value of seeing these inflammatory statements, that still remains the same. But because the probative value is so low, it's not admissible under 403.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
So on top of this napkin, there's a list of items that have been retrieved and found in Jordan Ryder's tent that the detective has already talked about or spoke about. Now, as far as the more prejudicial than probative value, this not only goes to show as a possible motive for committing the crime, which giving it an increasing amount of probative value, yet there are also numerous amounts of parallels on this napkin that the detective had found within the observing throughout her investigation.
The objection is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, what's at the top of this napkin?
On the top right-hand side, you can see that there's a number of figures on the napkin. It says 10K now, and then there's an arrow with a number of other figures on there with 200K now, or 200K circled with a question mark.
Did this ever come up in your investigation?
Yes, this was also the numbers of the life insurance policy that was on Parker Page were, excuse me, these were also the numbers of the life insurance policy that was taken out on Parker Page.
And what's this on the right?
On the right at the bottom, there is 4 items, and it's phone, stick, knife, and shovel. And the phone has a check mark, and then the stick, knife, and shovel have keep with a question mark, and those are the 3 items that we found in Jordan Ryder's tent.
And what about the list of statements on the left-hand side?
On the list of statements, you have 911, and then underneath that you have, I'm so sorry this happened, it was all my fault, crossed out. I was just so angry, crossed out. And I didn't mean to do it, crossed out. And then circled is missing, which is exactly what Jordan Ryder had told me Parker was.
Thank you. And it's at this time, Your Honor, that I have no further questions.
Thank you, counsel.
Attendance, Butch.
You may.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon, Detective.
Good afternoon.
I want to start at the very beginning of your investigation, okay? So you first arrive to the Calkins campground at around 9:55, right?
Yes,
You meet Jordan Ryder at 10 o'clock,
yes, and then I'm sleeping.
and in less than 10 minutes, you've already placed her under arrest, right?
Yes, I placed her under arrest because I believed she was in violation of her parole, and that was reason enough to arrest her.
And you're saying that you thought she was in violation of her parole.
Yes.
You never tried to find that parole agreement, did you?
No, at that point, my primary focus was finding Parker Page.
I'm aware that was your primary focus, ma'am, but at no point did you ever do any investigation into that first accusation you made against Miss Ryder, did you?
No.
Now, after you arrest her, you search the campground a little bit,
Yes, I did.
and eventually you find Parker Page's body, right?
Yes.
Now, after that, you go back to the station,
Yes.
you interrogate Miss Ryder,
Yes, I did.
and then you get an arrest warrant for kidnapping
Yes.
and felony murder.
Yes.
And you characterize this investigation as not just a murder investigation, but a kidnapping investigation as well.
Yes, because at that time, Jordan Ryder was not the primary custodian of Parker Page.
Well, I want to talk about that for a moment, because you'd agree you made some mistakes during this investigation, didn't you?
How so?
Well, at no point in your kidnapping investigation did you do any investigation into whether or not Jordan Ryder had custody of Parker Page.
At that time, I was aware that Corbin Dallas was the primary caregiver of Parker Page.
So you never did any investigation into the custody agreement between Jordan and Parker, right?
Not between Jordan and Parker, no.
And it turns out, ma'am, that, well, Jordan, she did have custody over Parker, right?
Yes, I wasn't made aware of that fact, but yes.
And the judge had to throw out that kidnapping charge, right?
Yes,
The judge had to throw out that felony murder charge.
I suppose.
And now we're here talking about aggravated murder, right?
Yes.
Now, on your direct, you mentioned 3 steps you took in your investigation. You said you talked about finding witnesses, right?
Yes.
You talked about searching for physical evidence,
Yes.
and you talked about investigating the crime scene specifically.
Yes,
So I'd like to examine those one at a time, starting with the witnesses. And you did the best you could to find as many witnesses as you could, right?
yes, we questioned every witness that had talked to Jordan Parker at campground, excuse me.
Now, ma'am, not a single one of those witnesses could say they saw Jordan murder Parker, could they?
No,
Not a single one of those witnesses could say they saw Jordan push her daughter off a cliff.
no,
Not a single one of those witnesses even saw Parker die at all, right?
no, and this goes back to the time, to what I was saying on direct, that there was a lot of time of seclusion between Jordan and Parker.
Well, you also mentioned talking about physical evidence, right?
Yes,
And regardless, it is your belief that Miss Ryder murdered her daughter, right?
yes,
It's your belief that her hiking staff was the murder weapon.
yes,
And your crime lab actually tested that, didn't it?
yes, it did.
And you didn't find any blood on it?
No, there was no blood on it.
Didn't find any marks on it?
No, there was no usable fingerprints on it.
No usable fingerprints? No usable DNA?
No, there was no DNA on it.
In fact, your crime lab couldn't find any forensic evidence at all that could tie that hiking staff to Parker Page's death, right?
No, there was none.
So you also talked about the setting, the crime scene, right?
Yes,
So I want to talk about that specifically.
okay.
Now, you found Parker on the Lacrone Loop Trail, right?
Yes, we did.
And you'd recognize a picture of that trail if I showed it to you.
Of course,
I'm approaching opposing counsel, Exhibit 6. May I approach the witness?
You may.
And would you like a courtesy copy, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Now, ma'am, this is a picture of the Lacrone Loop Trail, the one you found Parker on.
yes, this is the picture I took.
It looks the same as when you last saw it,
Yes,
and it accurately depicts the campground as you remember it.
Yep.
The defense moves to admit Exhibit 6 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
So admitted.
Now, ma'am, this is a pretty dangerous trail, wouldn't you say?
yes, it's the most dangerous at the campsite.
Yeah, you can see rocks and roots around it,
Yes,
and you describe it yourself as extremely dangerous.
yes, it was an extremely difficult trail. There had already been one death on the trail before Parker and Jordan had been there as well.
It was so dangerous you tried to stop your own officers from going on it, right?
When it got dark enough, then yes, I did suspend the investigation for a little bit because I believed it was too dangerous to be out there at night.
The trail that you found Parker Page on was too dangerous for adult police officers, wasn't it?
Yes,
Well, thank you for your time, then. May I approach the witness to retrieve the document?
You may.
And may I publish to the jury?
You may.
Brief read, right, Your Honor?
You may.
So, on the topic of witnesses, you did interview multiple witnesses, correct?
yes, I talked to every person that was on the campsite that day.
Did you
Campground, excuse me.
I'm sorry. Did you talk to a Kelly Dukes?
Yes, I did. Sorry, excuse me, go ahead.
No, you're fine.
Upon talking to Kelly Dews, she told me that she had seen.
Objection, hearsay.
Response, counsel?
If I may make an offer of proof, this is not going for the truth so much as the subsequent action. Kelly Dukes is going to tell Detective Chesney where they last saw Jordan Ryder and Parker Page. Detective Chesney is then going to go to the area where they were last seen by Kelly Dukes, and then that is where the body is found.
Response, counsel?
Your Honor, I believe that the prosecution is using it for the truth of the matter, sir. They're trying to say that Kelly Dukes saw the defendant and Parker arguing in a very specific spot, and therefore that's where the body was found, and they're trying to use that to prove their case, to prove that Miss Ryder committed aggravated murder. And even if we believe them that they're not using it for the truth of the matter asserted, if that were true, the probative value would go very low, and the prejudicial value would still remain the same for the exact same reasons I said earlier. So either way, under 402 or 403, this evidence is not admissible.
Points taken, counsel, but the objection will be overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
And how'd that go?
I talked to Kelly Dews and they said that they had seen Parker and Jordan earlier, or the previous day on the trails. And so she led me to that spot, and that was ultimately where we found Parker's body at the bottom of the cliff.
And finally, where did you find that hiking staff?
We found the hiking staff in Jordan's tent.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. The witness may step down.
Oh, I was just going to say nobody crossed. Your Honor.
Okay, okay, thank you. Does the prosecution have any additional witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we call Dr. Quincy to the stand. may proceed.
You may.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Robert Quincy.
Why are you here today, Dr. Quincy?
I'm here to testify about the autopsy I performed on the victim in this case, Ms. Parker Page.
And do you have any education that's relevant to this autopsy?
I do. In 1990, I earned my BS in biomedical sciences from the Ohio State University. I then went on to earn my MD from the University of Virginia School of Medicine.
What do you do for a living?
I've been the chief medical examiner of Breckenridge County right here in the state of Midlands for the past 5 years running.
For today's case, did you rely upon any data or evidence?
Yes, I did. I used the body of Parker Page for my autopsy. I even went to the crime scene itself to observe the surroundings of where the body was found. And I took several pictures at that site, and I'm also familiar with the medical records of Parker Page.
Did you reliably apply this to today's case?
Yes, they provided me with sufficient facts and data for this case.
Did you apply any method for today's case?
Yes, I applied what we in the forensic pathology field call the MET method.
What is the MET method?
It stands for Medical Records, Examination, and Time of Death. I look at the medical records of a patient in order to get a preliminary knowledge of their medical history. Then I perform the external and internal examination, look at their cuts and bruises and bone breakage to get a picture of what happened on the day in question. And then I move on to the time of death, which uses a formula to calculate their time of death.
Is this a reliable method in your field?
Yes, it's very reliable, used by many forensic pathologists throughout the field. It's considered the gold standard, in fact.
Now, Dr. Quincy, do you have any peer-reviewed journal articles that are relevant for today's case?
I do. I have a peer-reviewed article on rare bone diseases, in fact. It's titled Why Hips Don't Lie, and it deals with rare bone diseases, such as the one we have in this case known as osteogenesis imperfecta.
Now, I want to start breaking down that MET method. Let's first start off with medical history. What exactly is Parker Page's medical history?
Well, as I said, Parker Page has been diagnosed with osteogenesis imperfecta.
What exactly is osteogenesis imperfecta?
This is a malforming of the bones. It weakens the bone structure and can even cause severe respiratory problems due to the rib cage not forming correctly. It also induces severe bruising in a victim.
What exactly would osteogenesis imperfecta mean for Parker Page?
For Parker Page, it would mean that her bones would be more susceptible to breakage and her skin would be easier to bruise as well.
I want to now move on to that examination process. How did you break that down?
I started with an external examination of the body and then used a Y incision to move on to an internal examination of Parker Page's body.
At this time, Your Honor, may I set up the wall to make use of a demonstrative?
You may.
Did you bring anything with you today, Dr. Quincy, to display this for the members of the jury?
I did.
Point of order, Your Honor, I only ask that I may relocate myself to see this demonstration.
Sure, it is a standing order throughout this case. Opposing counsel can move without asking me if they need to review it or not.
I did. I brought a mock-up of a standard body that would help display for the jury the breaks and bruises that Parker Page sustained in the fall.
You may witness that now.
He may.
Okay, what was your key word?
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay.
Now, Dr. Quincy, can you start walking us through that external examination you did?
Yes, I can. See here, these numbers indicate the number of bruises and fractures that Parker Page sustained, and with the red marks being the bruises and the dashes here being the fractures and where they were sustained.
And on that external examination, did anything stand out to you?
Yes, the most notable thing in my external examination was this bruise right here it had a very distinct coloration, shape, and it's also, as you can see, the lone bruise on the left side of Parker Page's body.
What does the shape and location tell us about this bruise?
The shape was a sort of half-circle moon shape. Now, that generally comes from a downward force, something that came from above the victim. The location of this bruise is interesting because it's the sole bruise on this side of the body.
Were you ever able to determine a cause for this bruise?
Yes, I was. After I was given a hiking staff by Detective Chesney, I measured it against this bruise and found that it had the exact same dimensions, 2.25 by 1.125, as this bruise here exactly.
Would you recognize the picture of that hiking staff I've shown to you today?
Yes, I would.
Let the record reflect I'm approaching opposing counsel with exhibit 17A and B. May I push the witness?
You may.
Record reflect I'm approaching the witness with the same with your honor.
No, thanks.
Dr. Quincy, what did I just hand you?
You handed me a picture of the hiking staff of Parker Page.
And is it changed or altered since the last time you saw it?
It does not appear to be.
How can you tell that this is the exact hiking staff?
Well, for one, the capped end here I'm seeing looks to be exactly the same dimensions as this bruise, and as I've previously mentioned, this would be that hiking staff.
At this time, the prosecution offers exhibit 17A and B into evidence.
Any objections?
No objection, Your Honor.
Now, Dr. Quincy, did you, in your internal examination, what were your findings?
The most interesting thing I found in my internal examination was this bone fracture here, because as you can see, it's directly under this same bruise.
And were you ever able to determine a cause for that fracture as well?
Yes, given that it's directly under that bruise, it's most likely that that fracture was caused by the same thing that caused the bruise, which is namely the force of this hiking staff.
Now, I want to move on to your time of death conclusion.
All right.
How did you determine that?
I determined my time of death by taking the average temperature of a human body, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and subtracting that by what I measured Parker Page's body temperature to be, 68.6 degrees Fahrenheit. I then divided that by the average rate of heat loss, being 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit per hour, and that allowed me to see how many hours Parker Page had been dead for.
And what did you conclude was Parker's time of death?
I concluded Parker died somewhere around 4 to 6 p.m.
Dr. Quincy, were you ever able to determine a cause for Parker Page's death?
Yes, the cause of Parker Page's death is actually blunt force trauma to the head, which was sustained in her fall.
And finally, Dr. Quincy, what is your overall conclusion on today's case?
My overall conclusion on today's case is that Parker died somewhere between 4 and 6 p.m. due to this blunt force trauma to the head that she sustained in a fall that happened after she was pushed, and this clavicle bruise was created by this hiking staff.
Thank you, Dr. Quincy. It's at this time that I have no further questions.
Thank you, counsel. Cross-examination.
Would opposing counsel like me to deconstruct the demonstration?
Yes, you may deconstruct if you want to. Afternoon, Dr. Quincy.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to begin and talk about that hiking staff that you mentioned on your direct examination.
All right.
Now that hiking staff, it wasn't an exact match of the injury that Parker Page sustained, now was it?
The capped end of this hiking staff matched the dimensions of that bruise perfectly.
Sure, it matched. Well, let's talk about that there, Doctor. Now, the hiking staff itself is a full circle, isn't that right?
Yes, it is.
And the injury that Parker Page sustained is a half circle, correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's why I concluded that the force must have come from above. That way the half would be not shown in the bruise.
So then, Dr. Quincy, you would agree that then that hiking staff is not an exact match of the injury that she sustained, correct?
It's an exact match if you take it from the angle that I believe the force came from.
But again, it's not an exact match of the injury sustained, isn't that right?
I suppose if you'd like to put it that way, that's correct.
Now, specifically that hiking staff, you didn't conduct any DNA analysis on it, did you?
I did not know.
Right, so you didn't find any clothing fibers on the hiking staff itself, correct?
No, there were none found as far as I know.
Right, you didn't find anything that would tie that hiking staff to Jordan Ryder, isn't that right?
That's correct.
You didn't find any blood on that hiking staff, did you?
I did not.
In fact, you didn't find anything that could tie that hiking staff to Parker Page as well, correct?
Not that I've found in my specific investigation, no.
I'd now like to talk about the injury itself specifically. Now, you believe that that injury was sustained before her death, isn't that right?
Yes, I do.
But Dr. Quincy, you would agree with me that you're not exactly sure when that injury occurred, correct?
No, it can't be said for certain when this injury was sustained.
Right, this injury could have even been from a separate incident, correct?
It's quite possible, but given the dimensions of the hiking staff matching that bruise, they were likely matched with this hiking staff.
But Dr. Quincy, we agreed that the specific hiking staff only matched the force at which it was, the force at which you claimed it hit Parker with, right?
And the angle, yes.
Not the injury itself, right?
I believe the bruise is the injury, and the dimensions of this hiking staff at a certain angle do match that.
Dr. Quincy, let's clear this up for the jury. Again, the hiking staff itself does not exactly match the injury she sustained. Isn't that right?
I would not completely agree with that, no.
So, Dr. Quincy, just to clarify here, is it your testimony that the hiking staff completely matches the injury that Parker Page sustained? Is that right?
From a specific angle, yes.
Dr. Quincy, I'm not asking you from a specific angle. I'm simply asking you as to whether that hiking staff, the full circle, completely matched the injury that Parker Page sustained on the left side of her clavicle.
Yes, it does.
Well, coming back to that injury itself, you would agree with me that that injury could have been sustained earlier in the day, right?
I suppose that is possible, yes.
So again, you can't conclusively tell this jury that that injury occurred after she died, right?
That's correct.
Thank you, Dr. Quincy. I have no further questions for Dr. Quincy.
Thank you, counsel. Any redirect examination?
Briefly, Your Honor. May I proceed? Dr. Quincy, you were asked an awful lot about that hiking staff on cross-examination. Can you explain for the members of the jury how you were able to match that up to the bruise?
Yes, as I said before, the shape of the bruise indicates a downward force, which means that since 1.125 is half of 2.25 centimeters, it indicates that the top section of this hiking staff was what caused that bruise, indicating a downward angle.
Thank you, Dr. Quincy. I have no further questions.
Thank you, counsel. Any recross?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. Now, Dr. Quincy, you received that hiking staff from Detective Chesney 4 days after your initial examination, isn't that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And before you received that hiking staff from Dr. Quincy, you concluded that the death of Parker Page could have been an accident, isn't that correct?
That's correct. This hiking staff was about...
Objection, Your Honor. This cross-examination is out of the scope of the redirect.
Response, Your Honor?
It has to be held within.
Yes, response.
Your Honor, I was asking Dr. Quincy specifically about that hiking staff. Opposing counsel's redirect examination had to do with that hiking staff, and I'm simply asking the witness questions that have to do with that hiking staff and when they had retrieved it from Detective Chesney.
Counsel, I do think you've moved beyond, so I'm going to sustain the objection. If you are getting to something directly to the hiking staff based upon her question, you certainly may ask that question.
Yes, Your Honor.
Motion to strike pending testimony.
So granted.
But, so again, Dr. Quincy, just to clarify, before you received that, before you received the hiking staff from Detective Chesney, you concluded that it could have been an accident.
Objection, Your Honor. Again, out of scope. The cross-examination was on the bruise in that hiking staff. Dr. Quincy's conclusion on the ruling of the death is out of the scope of the redirect.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. With that, there will be no further recross, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. The witness may step down. I think we need to tender the evidence to the
I will
bench.
quickly tender this.
Does the prosecution have any additional witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Kelly Deuce to the stand. Now, before we begin, permission to set up the well for the use of the demonstrative.
You may.
May I proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, my name is Kelly.
I want to begin by letting the jury get to know you a little bit better and why you're here. What do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a social media influencer, but I primarily focus on my YouTube channel.
What kind of videos do you make on your YouTube channel?
So my channel is a little unique. It's a comedy channel, but it's unique in the sense that my viewers don't really think I'm funny, but they enjoy watching me and laughing at things that I do that like scare me. So like my most viewed series on my channel is me jumping up tall buildings, and I'm terrified of heights, so of course it's really funny. But lately I've been focusing more on like going on adventures and story.
Have you been to the Calkins campground before?
Yeah, I have. So I actually went there because I heard there was a murder there in 2008, and I'm scared of anything paranormal. So of course I had to go there for my review. Sorry.
What day was this?
This was July 14th of 2018.
I want to walk through your day a little bit. How did your morning begin?
So my morning began pretty normally. I just packed and like left for the campground. I got there a little after 1 p.m. Yeah.
Did you go hiking at all?
I did, yeah. When I first got there, I saw a sign that said to check in. I didn't really see anybody on the campground though. I saw firemen where we was this cabin, no one was there. So I just headed straight out to the trails.
Which trails did you go on?
I started off on the Wagner Loop, and funny story about this one. I wasn't there for a long time because I started seeing all these footsteps behind me, and I got really scared. Thought it might have been the ghost from that murder. Turns out it was just my own footsteps, but I got out there real quick, and I headed to the Lacroix Loop next.
Now let's talk about your experience on the Lacroix Loop. Did you see anybody while you were on the Lacroix Loop?
I did, yeah. I saw Jordan Ryder and Parker Page.
How did they seem to you?
Well, the first thing I noticed about Parker is that she had a bit of a limp. She was favoring her right leg more. And she had a hiking stick that she was just thrashing around, hitting tree branches with, hitting the ground with, honestly, even hitting Jordan with.
How did Jordan react to Parker hitting Jordan?
She got kind of annoyed. Like, while Parker was hitting like the tree branch and stuff, she kept like she got all red in the face and kept yelling like, quit it at her. It was kind of scary.
So what'd you do? Did you talk to them at all?
I did, yeah. I just wanted to kind of distract them from whatever was happening there. So I talked at the campground, told them they should check out the Muskie Pond. But Jordan just said something like, at the rate things are going with this, we might not even make it up far.
How did Parker react to that?
So in response to hearing that, Parker started poking at Jordan with her hiking staff, and Jordan got really mad.
What did Jordan do?
Jordan ripped the hiking staff out of Parker's hands, and she almost fell to the ground. Then Jordan took the hiking staff and she jabbed at Parker's left hand.
Objection, Your Honor. Pursuant to Rule 404, improper character evidence may be heard.
You may.
Your Honor, we as the defense have a good faith basis that the prosecution is alleging that the hiking staff, specifically a jab from the hiking staff, was the cause of Parker Page's death. Opposing counsel is trying to use this specific example of Miss Ryder jabbing the hiking staff at Miss Page to show that she may have been acting in conformity therewith later on that day. Therefore, this is improper character evidence under Rule 404B.
May I respond?
Response, counsel.
If I can draw your attention to case law State versus Torres in the pre-trial binder.
Continue.
It states that a pertinent trait is admissible in character evidence, not necessarily to show conformity therewith, although to show that someone has a specific pertinent trait in today's case. Now, Kelly Deuce testifying that Jordan got angry and started poking back at Parker goes to the pertinent trait that Jordan on that day was angry and arguing with Parker, not necessarily to show conformity therewith, but that it's likelier that since they were arguing that day that Jordan was just angry.
May I respond to those grounds, Your Honor? You may. Your Honor, this specific act does not fall under the pertinent trait argument, and as for a pertinent trait, that means that it must directly apply to one of the elements in today's case. Whether or not Ms. Ryder is an angry person is not a pertinent trait to whether or not she killed her daughter in today's case.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Counsel, I guess I'm ready to rule on this. I don't think that this is character evidence at all, and I'm going to overrule your objection.
Would you like me to re-ask the question?
Yes, please.
So what did Jordan do?
So, in response to Parker looking at her calf, Jordan ripped the hiking staff out of her hands, and Parker almost fell to the ground. Then, Jordan took the hiking staff and jabbed at Parker's left hip. Luckily, Parker jumped out of the way, or she would have gotten hit.
What did you do?
I got really uncomfortable seeing all this, so I just headed off the trail for a little bit. I went down by the lake.
Did you ever come back?
I did, yeah. I stayed down by the lake about an hour. Then I was kind of scared. So I headed back up the way it come down. And I ran into Jordan and Parker again.
What were they doing this time?
Well, they were in the exact same spot I had left them an hour previously, and they were still arguing with each other. They were just a little louder and more aggressive, and I didn't want to stay for that. So I took off again. As I was leaving, though, I saw Jordan grabbing either Parker's left arm or the hiking staff. I wasn't really sure.
Would you recognize a picture of the Calkins map if I were to show it to you?
Yeah.
What did I just hand you?
This is the map of the Calkins campground.
Is this the same map that you saw on the weekend of July 14th?
Yeah.
Permission for my witness to step down and make use of the demonstrative aid?
She may.
Now, Kelly, can you mark on the map where you saw Jordan and Parker arguing both times?
Yes, so both times it was right under the mark with an X. It was right over here where I saw them arguing.
Thank you. Permission for my witness to retake the stand?
She may.
Kelly, you said you headed over to the Calkins Rock Overlook. Could you see anything there?
Well, that was a pretty heavily lit area, so I couldn't really see much of anything, but I heard a lot of screaming. I know I definitely heard Parker's voice. And then I heard this yell. It sounded somewhat like a wild animal, but it was definitely human. And after that yell, there was just silence.
Did you go back down to check on whatever that was?
I really wanted to, but it was a pretty dangerous area out there. There was a lot of drop-offs, and I'm already scared of heights. So I just called out to see if anyone needed help, but I didn't get a response.
Did you see anything on the way back down?
I didn't see anyone, and all I really saw were just so many broken twigs and footprints on the ground.
Where were these broken twigs and footprints?
They were in the same spot Jordan and Parker were arguing earlier.
I want to talk a little bit about the next day. How did your morning begin?
So my morning was, for the most part, pretty chill. I woke up early, was just getting some work done in my cabin, and then around 10 a.m., I heard a bunch of sirens outside.
Where were these sirens coming from?
They were coming from near Armando Rodriguez's cabin, so I went outside to go check them out.
Did you talk to them at all?
Yeah, so when I got there, I saw a bunch of police and first responders in the area, and Detective Chesney approached me with a photograph of Parker Page, and told me she had gone missing, and I had seen Parker the day before, so of course I wanted to help, so I led Detective Chesney and some other responders out to where I'd seen Jordan and Parker arguing the day before.
Were you and the officers able to find Parker?
Well, we searched for a few hours, and eventually we did find her. She was in the same exact spot I had seen Jordan and Parker arguing on the Lacombe Trail the day before, just 40 people though.
Thank you, Kelly. At this time, I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Would opposing counsel like for me to deconstruct this?
No, I would like for you to leave that.
All right.
Good afternoon, Ms. Dews.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to start by talking a little bit about Blue Chrome Loop. Now, you agree with me that this is a pretty dangerous trail, right?
Yeah, especially towards like near up at Hawkins Rock is kind of dangerous, yeah.
It's a harder trail to hike, right?
Yeah, the end of it is, yeah.
And it can take a while to hike, right, because of that danger.
Oh, definitely, yeah, like, it's a pretty short distance from the, like, I guess distance-wise from the rock to like the overlook, but it takes a while with all the sharp rocks.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation. May I explain?
You may.
This witness is testifying how long it takes in general to take this hike. However, the prosecution has a good faith belief that the defense will be using this to elicit testimony that Jordan and Parker, it would take them a long time to make that hike too. And in order for this witness to testify to that, Your Honor, this would be speculation.
Response, Your Honor. That is not at all what my line of questioning is going towards. I'm asking Ms. Dews, in her opinion, if it would take a long time to hike. This is going directly towards her credibility, and if you give me a little bit of latitude, I can show you as such with my next few questions.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, just to clarify, Ms. Dews, you did say that this trail can take a while to hike, right?
Yeah, especially parts of it.
All right, so I'd like to direct your attention to this map. Now, you would say that the distance from the beginning of Blue Chrome Loop Trail to the spur of the Calkins Overlook is about 3 miles, right?
Yeah.
Now, you entered Blue Chrome Loop Trail at 3 p.m., right?
Yes.
And you said that it took you 20 to 30 minutes to reach the spur at the Calkins Rock Overlook, right?
Yeah, it took me about 30 minutes.
So, just to clarify, this extremely difficult hike that took quite a while to climb, you made it 3 miles in roughly 20 minutes.
Yeah, well, the first portion of the hike.
Thank you, Ms. Dews.
Your Honor, point of order, I just ask that Kelly Dews be allowed to finish answering the question before opposing counsel asks another question.
At this point, I think it's a matter for redirect.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Ms. Dews, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about the second time you claim to have seen Miss Ryder and Miss Page. Now, that was at 4:25 p.m., right?
What's the matter, yes?
Your Honor, permission to make use of the well to construct a demonstrative?
You may.
And that second interaction was at the spur leading up to the Calkins Rock Overlook, right?
Yes, that's correct.
The same place where you claim to have seen them before, right?
Yeah.
The place you claim it took you 20 minutes to get to, right?
Well, a little more than that, I can figure out, but yeah.
I am placing Kelly Dews seeing Jordan and Parker at the spur leading up to Calkins Rock at 4:25 p.m. on the timeline.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Now, Ms. Dews, shortly after this, you say that you heard a loud scream, right? At 4:40 p.m. to be exact.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, you described this scream as animalistic in nature, right?
Yeah, but it was human.
And you were highly concerned about this scream, right?
I was, yeah.
But after you heard the scream, you didn't turn around to go check in the location where you heard the scream, did you?
No, I couldn't. Like I said, drop-offs in here, and I'm scared of heights.
Now, Ms. Dews, later that day, you actually spoke to the owner of Calkins Campground, Armani Rodriguez, right?
Yes, I did.
You never mentioned that scream to Armani Rodriguez, did you?
No, I didn't.
You never called the police about hearing that scream, did you?
No, I didn't.
As a matter of fact, the first time you mentioned that scream to anyone was when the police approached you the next day, right?
Yeah, that was the first time I had any indication that something could have gone wrong.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about your interaction with the police. When the police approached you, you quickly volunteered to help them find the body, right?
Of course, I want to do my duty.
And you said that you took them right to the spot where you heard Jordan and Parker arguing, right?
Yeah.
But they didn't find the body right away, did they?
No, we searched for a little bit.
You actually searched for several hours before you found the body.
Yeah, we did.
Thank you, Ms. Dews. Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness at this time. Would opposing counsel like for me to deconstruct the demonstrative?
Yes, you can take it down. And there will be no redirect, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you.
I just asked that Kelly be allowed to sit there.
Ms. Dews, you may step down. At this time, does the prosecution wish to rest its case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor, and we ask for a brief 5 to 10 minute recess.
Okay, let me tell you what time to come back.
Do we know what time all officers?
No, I'm not sure, but I don't think we really know. It's 3 o'clock now, so let's come back at 3:05.